Good day, guys. Abdurrahman here, the code cruncher. So in this video, we're going to learn 8 different ways by which we can center a div using CSS. So what I have right now in my VS Code is just a simple HTML file and also a CSS file which I've connected to my HTML file for this practical. So going to the CSS file, we have just a simple styling for the container and the element inside the container. As you can see right here, we have a container and an element inside of it. So that's what this styling is, just basic styling. So we can also see what it looks like here. So what we want to do now is put this text right here, this div, and center it here, both vertically and horizontally, using 8 different approaches in CSS. Okay, so just getting right to it, the first method we're going to check out is using CSS Flexbox. Okay, so and this is actually the easiest and the most used case scenario ever since the introduction of Flexbox into CSS, which is like a lifesaver for almost every single front-end developer. So it's the easiest one and it's the first one I'm going to look at. So to use Flexbox to center your elements, so basically what you need to do is go to the parent container of that element you want to center, then add a styling property of display to flex, right? Then you also need to add 2 more properties. So they are justify content, you add it to center, and also items, align items, so also to center. So how does this work? Justifies content is used to, okay, first of all, let's see what it looks like. Bam. So you can see we already have our elements perfectly centered in the middle of its parents. So analyzing how this works is you need to know that justify content centers a flex item on its main axis. So while align items, it centers your flex item on the cross axis. So you know that flex property by default, it's in a row direction. That is, it moves in a row direction. So it is when you want to change its direction to column that you need to add that property of column. So it moves in the row direction. So if I remove align items and leave only justify content, now you see it is only going to be centered in the main axis. So and this is what it would look like. So it is only centered in the main axis, right? So for if I want it to be centered also in the cross axis of that particular, of the flex block or the flex parent, then I essentially, what I need to do is I need to add this align items. So what you just need to know is to center your an element inside the container, you need to add the display of flex to make it a flex, to make it move in the flex pattern. Then add the justify content to center it in main axis. That is the direction in which your items are. Then the align items to center it in the cross axis. That is the opposite direction of whatever direction your elements are aligned in. So that's the first one I'm looking at, and that's how to uh, align it using, that's how to center a div using flex. Now moving to the next one, we're going to talk about using absolute positioning. So there are different case scenarios if you develop applications using your CSS, and there are some scenarios whereby your item needs to be an absolute item. So absolute item, what means your element is not, when you want to remove an element from the natural flow of how your elements are being stacked in the layout. So once you set an element to absolute, then it is removed from this normal layout flow of the rest of the elements, and it stands alone, or it stands relative to whatever parent you add. So all this everything I'm saying might sound confusing, but if you are familiar with CSS, you don't have an issue with it. So what I'm literally saying is, if I set the position of this element to be absolute, for example, now if I say position, sorry, position of absolute, right, and you see and we check out what it looks like. So it might still look the same, but what this does is it takes this element away from the normal flow and makes it absolute to to the HTML element, to the viewport of this web page now. So for if I want to use absolute on an element and I want to center it, I need to set its container to position of a relative, so that this element right here is absolute, is set to absolute, but it is relative to whatever its parent is. That is, it's not going to leave its parents at any point in time. So it's always going to be contained inside its parent, and whatever position I add to it is going to be relative to its parent. So this does not cut it, because we still need to add some other properties like setting the position manually, because that's what you, anytime you set your element to absolute, then it means you want to set the position manually yourself. So you set top to 50%. Do the same thing with left. You also set the left to 50%, right? So the nice trick, or let me say, the what makes everything works best is now add the transform translate, right? Translate to -50 on the x-axis, -50%, and also -50% on the y-axis, right? So this does it. So if you check it now, we should have a perfectly centered div, right? So that's the second way, guys. Let's move to the next one. So the next one I want to talk about is using margin auto. Okay, so this one is like also very straightforward, but it has a downside. So the downside is it does not always work. Works for it only works in the x direction of your element. So to explain what I mean, so if I set this if and to use the margin auto, if I set the margin to auto, right, and I check it out now, so you can see it is only aligned in the x direction, right? It is not aligned in the y direction. So that's because CSS checks for available weights on both sides of the elements, that is on the right side and on the left side. So it balances it to place it in the perfect center, but it is not able to do this for the y direction. But there is an arc, or there is a way you can go about this, which I'm going to use part of one of the other ones that I've not talked about yet. So let's just keep going. So I think this margin auto is pretty straightforward. So the best case scenarios for using this margin auto is just probably when you have uh you have you have something you just want to center only on the x direction, or centering it on the x direction is all that matters. Or probably something that you don't want, you just want to add like maybe a little gap on the y axis. So you can go use margin auto, then put whatever gap you want to add on probably the top or bottom of that element. So that's for margin auto. Moving to the next one, I want to talk about using text align and line height. So a spoiler alert, using text align and line height only works for inline elements. So if you want to use it on a block, then you probably would need to add a display of inline block for it to work on it. So now enough talking, let's get to work. So using text align, right? So let's remove this now. And if you want to use text align, you add it on the parent, not on the child, because you want to align everything inside that parent to the center. So text align center, right? Okay, so text align to the center, and uh line. Okay, so only text align to the center should work already for this. Okay, so like I said, I think we need to make this a display of inline block for this to work. Right, guys? So you saw that it didn't work at first because our div is a block element, and as I mentioned, text align only works on inline elements. So you need to set the display to inline block or inline for it to work. So this text align alone does it, because text align only centers it on the x direction. So but for you to now make this element also centered on the y direction, then you need to add another property to your element. So you need to add property of uh line height. Okay, yeah, line height. So you need to, but it needs to also be on the container, right? So line height. and you need to set this line height to also be exactly the same thing as your height. So in our case now, our height is 100 VH, right? So it means our line height should also be 100 VH for this to work perfectly. So when I do this now, so I'm supposed to say perfectly centered. Exactly. So we have a perfectly centered div now. Can you see? So this has implications because as you can see that the div is spanning from all the way from the top to the bottom. So depending on your case scenario, this might be exactly what you want or probably not. You know, you just need to choose what's best suits your case scenario. So this is how we center using the text align and line height. So remember, you need to set the display to inline block, and you also need to ensure that the line height is the same thing as the height that you set for your parent container. So that's how to use the text align and line height. Moving to the next one, I want to talk about using CSS table display, right? So using CSS table display, the first thing you need to know is that you need to set the display of your parents or of the parent container to table, right? So setting it to table, it makes your elements function or work like an actual table, right? So this makes it kind of easier for us to just center whatever it is we want to center inside. So let me remove the styling here now. So when you set your parents container to table, then you need to come to the child. So first of all, let's see what it looks like now. Okay, so now you can see that it has string to take only the width of its child. So for our parent to take the full width as it has always been taken, we need to set the width to 100%, guys. So set the width to 100%. So I'm doing this so that it will be easier for us to see how centering the div is going to look like. So you can see now that it spans all the way to the end of the page. So to the end of the viewport. So that's setting the width to 100%. Now we need to center our element, which is our main concern. So what's the first thing you need to know is that to set this, you need to you need to add a property. You need to add a property uh to our elements. So I think that property is uh table display. Sorry. So we need to set the display to table cell, right? So what does this mean? Setting the display to table cell means it is just like saying you want this to take a portion of our table, but since this is the only child of this parent, it's going to take all the space available, right? So this table cell literally means taking a portion or taking a part of this our container, like a table data when you use our normal HTML. So if you check our results now, you can see that okay now so you can see that the child has taken the whole page. So like I said, it is the only element there, so that's why it's taking the whole available space on its table container. So the next thing we want to do now is, because we've not achieved any centering at this point, so we need to add the text. We need to add the text align to center, right? So if you check it now, so we can see we already have it centered on the x-axis. So that's what text align does, right? So now for we to have it also aligned on the y-axis, we need to table, the using a display of table makes it easier for us to add something like a vertical align, right? So vertical align of middle. So I think this should do it exactly. So you can see now that we have our elements perfectly centered, perfectly positioned in the center. So I think now we're done with this one now. So moving on to the next one, using CSS grid with place items. So okay, so using CSS grid, a lot of people run away from CSS grid for a lot of reasons. It's kind of complex, and sometimes it looks like an overkill for some stylings. So using CSS grid to center an element, the first thing we need to do obviously is to set our display to grid, right? Okay, so setting our display to grid, let me remove all of this junk. So when you set our display to grid, you see, we might not see any difference. So we don't see much difference. So the next thing we need to do is we need to come and modify our changes on the elements. So I think literally we need to set the place. Okay, no. The place content should come on the container, right? So place content. So place content set to center. So I think they should do it. Let me check. Exactly. So place content, what does place content do? Place content is used to set is used to set a particular styling on all the grid items inside the grid container, right? So place content, what does it say? This literally means I want to place all the items inside my grid in the center of this grid, right? So that's how place content works. So and I think it's pretty straightforward. So we can see it is perfectly centered, perfectly aligned in the center. So moving on to the next one, let's talk about using grid with place items. So we have another option of using place items instead of place content, and we are going to have the same result, I guess. Exactly. So you can see we have exactly the same result as using place content. So what's the difference between place content and place items? So they are pretty similar, but they have just one unique difference. And the difference is that place content to is used to add a styling to all of the grid items inside the grid. But place items is more used, or let me say it was designed to be used to center in the individual grid items of a grid container. So I don't know if you got that. So place content is like used if you want to add a styling to all of your grid items, but place items is like used for individual grid items. So but basically they do essentially the same thing. So we might not want to put it in the center, we might want to put it on the left or on the right, but I'm using center because that's the main goal of this tutorial. So moving on to the next thing you can also use, which is the solution which is the solution to using margin auto that I mentioned initially. So the cheat code I wanted to talk about, if you want to use margin auto at all costs, you can use it with grid, right? So using margin auto with grid, after setting the display to grid, the next thing we need to do is, so first of all, you can see that at this point basically don't have it centered yet, right? So you can just use margin auto with this and it works perfectly, right? So if I just add a margin auto to my element, so you can see it is perfectly centered. So if you want to use your margin auto to center your div both horizontally and vertically, you can just set its parent to a display of grid if that does not break your CSS styling. So it works perfectly for it. So I think this wraps up the 8 different ways by which you can center a div using CSS. So if you found value in this video, kindly subscribe or click the kindly subscribe. I really appreciate that, and also do not forget to leave a thumbs up and probably a nice text or a nice message in the comment section. Thank you for your time, and I hope you really found value in this video. See you in the next video. Cheers for now.